They were 4 when they left Moscow that spring, 4 names soon to be whispered with unease. Maxim Volkov, 38, a seasoned wilderness guide whose maps were drawn more from memory than ink. Lena Orlova, 32, an ecologist from St. Petersburg, sharp-eyed and quiet, carrying years of fieldwork in the Arctic Circle. Pavel Sidorov, 41, a documentary filmmaker, known for chasing the dangerous edge of human endurance. And Artem Morozov, just 25, a grad student with a nervous laugh, eager to prove himself beyond the university halls. They met through a shared obsession, a site deep in the Siberian taiga, long rumored among hunters and reindeer herders but never confirmed on any map. Some called it the Shaman's Scar, a strange, scorched clearing that locals claimed had been there for centuries, its origin unexplained. Others whispered of a meteorite strike, like Tunguska but older, a wound in the earth still smoldering with strange energies. For Pavel, it was a documentary waiting to happen. For Lena, a chance to study a unique ecosystem. For Maxim, it was curiosity, pure and dangerous. And for Artem, it was the allure of belonging, of being part of something legendary. Their preparations were careful, but not paranoid. Food, fuel, cold weather gear, GPS, radios, survival kits. Maxim insisted on old-school backups, a compass, paper maps, flares. Technology is a tool, not a lifeline, he said, tightening the straps on his pack. Friends and colleagues saw them off with waves, laughter, and warnings, but no one really believed they were in danger. After all, Maxim had been through worse. They departed on April 20, 2015, flying first to Yakutsk, then overland by truck to the last settlement near the Lena River basin. From there, it was snowmobiles and sleds, until even those gave out, and it became a journey on foot. The last image they posted was a photo. 4 figures in heavy coats, faces flushed from cold, eyes bright with something between excitement and defiance. Beneath the photo, Pavel had captioned it, "The edge of the world awaits." No one knew it then, but that would be the last anyone saw of them for 6 years. The trees closed in around them like walls, dark, towering larches and pines, their branches heavy with melting snow, casting shadows that swallowed the narrow animal tracks they followed. The taiga was alive with small sounds, the crack of ice, the call of a raven, the faint rustle of something unseen darting through underbrush. For the first 2 days, spirits were high. Pavel filmed everything, narrating with practiced charm, while Lena catalogued moss samples and tiny frostbitten blooms pushing through the thawing ground. Maxim led the way, his face expressionless but his movements sure. Artem followed close behind, occasionally tripping, then laughing it off, his pack too big for his slight frame. At night, they gathered around a small campfire, the cold creeping in the moment the sun dipped below the tree line. Maxim would check their bearings, grunting approval. Lena would note her findings by headlamp. Pavel reviewed his footage, mumbling ideas to himself, and Artem, restless, stared into the dark, sometimes asking questions no one answered. By the 3rd day, the terrain changed. The land grew uneven, pocked with old craters and marshy sinkholes hidden under brittle snow. Maxim slowed, consulting his map more often. The GPS became erratic, flickering between coordinates, sometimes showing nothing at all. They joked about magnetic interference, about the shaman's curse, but unease had begun to settle like frost on their words. And then they found it a clearing where no clearing should be. The ground was bare, a wide circle of ash and scorched earth, as if fire had visited long ago and never fully left. The trees around it were twisted, bark-warped and blackened at the base. Lena crouched, brushing fingers through the soil, whispering, "It's warm." Pavel filmed in silence, his hand trembling. Artem shivered, though the wind was still. Maxim, for the first time, looked uncertain. That night, their fire barely held. The woods around them were too quiet. No animal sounds, no wind in the branches, just a weight in the air, thick and watching. They did not know it yet, but they had crossed a line, stepped onto ground where they were no longer guests, but intruders, and the forest, vast and old, had just begun to notice. The next morning they pushed on. Maxim led them east, deeper into the trees, following half-frozen streams and old hunter trails marked only by faint notches in bark. The air felt heavier. Lena noticed at first scat patterns that made no sense, droppings from elk, hare, even fox, all clustered too close, as if the animals had been driven from somewhere. Pavel filmed the tracks, murmuring into his camera, but his usual playfulness was gone. Artem had stopped talking altogether, eyes darting to every crack of branch, every gust of wind that didn't move the trees. By midday, they found the first camp, a ring of stones blackened by old fire, scraps of canvas buried in ice, the bones of something large, maybe reindeer, gnawed clean and scattered. Maxim crouched, fingers brushing the stones. "This wasn't recent," he muttered, but his voice was tight. Lena photographed the site, frowning at claw marks on a nearby log, long and deep, too wide for bear, too jagged for wolf. Pavel recorded everything, his lens lingering on the bones, the torn fabric, the silence. As they moved on, the forest began to change. Trees twisted at odd angles, some split down the middle, sap frozen like blood in winter air. They passed birches with strange symbols carved into them, circles inside circles, jagged lines radiating outward. Artem touched one, fingers trembling. "What is it?" he whispered. Maxim shook his head, saying nothing. Lena sketched the markings into her notebook, trying to steady her hand. That night, the air turned colder, the silence heavier. Their campfire crackled weakly, light barely pushing back the dark. Artem barely ate. Pavel sat close to Lena, camera forgotten, as if the lens couldn't explain what they'd seen. Maxim stayed on the edge of the circle, staring into the black, knife in hand. Somewhere far off, an owl called, or something that almost sounded like an owl. Nobody spoke, and above them, through the thin break in the trees, the sky shimmered faintly, as if watching back. They waited until morning to use the radio. Maxim didn't want to waste the batteries, but by then even he looked relieved to hear a voice on the other end. Crackling through static, the base team in Yakutsk confirmed their check-in. Maxim gave coordinates. Lena reported their progress. Pavel cracked a dry joke about haunted forests, and Artem's voice barely rose above a whisper when asked how he was holding up. Then came the warning. "Be advised," the voice from base said, rough with interference. "Severe front, moving in from the northwest. Whiteout conditions, possibly blizzard. Recommend shelter, do not attempt further progress east." Maxim's eyes tightened. He thanked the operator and signed off, slipping the radio back into his pack. No one spoke of turning back. By noon, the first flakes drifted down thin at first, like ash, then thicker, colder, faster. Maxim pushed the pace, muttering about finding higher ground. Lena walked with her head down, glancing now and then at the trees, which were thinning into a patch of scrubby hills. Pavel lagged, camera dangling forgotten at his side. Artem stumbled, once, twice, then bit back a sob. They were moving blind, chasing an idea, chasing a place that maybe didn't want to be found. Near the top of the ridge, they saw it. Another campsite, this one newer, its tent poles collapsed under the weight of old snow. Inside, a cracked thermos, a notebook too waterlogged to read, and a child's glove, small, pink, faded by time. Maxim turned away sharply, shoulders hunched. Pavel filmed, his hands shaking so hard the footage blurred. Artem picked up the glove, then froze, eyes fixed on the tree line where something moved or seemed to. By dusk, the storm had arrived in full, wind howling through the trees, snow tearing sideways. They huddled in their tent, radio silent, batteries drained from the last call. The fabric shuddered with each gust, the air inside growing colder, the silence outside absolute. And then, faintly, just past the edge of their light, a flash, like movement, or maybe just the wind. They didn't know it then, but they would never speak to the outside world again. The last check-in was done, and beyond the storm, the forest was waiting. By dawn, the world outside had turned white. Snow hammered the tent walls, so heavy they sagged inward, the seams groaning under the weight. Maxim crawled out first, pushing against the fabric, boots sinking deep into drifts as the wind slapped his face raw. Visibility was near zero, a swirling blur of white and shadow, no horizon, no sky. Lena emerged next, coughing into her sleeve, eyes red from cold. Pavel clutched his camera under his coat, but it stayed off. Even Artem, usually eager to document everything, sat shivering, arms wrapped tight around his knees. They'd packed for winter, but not for this. The GPS flickered, confused, the little blinking dot freezing, jumping, vanishing. Maxim cursed under his breath, shaking the device, then pocketing it with a sharp motion. "We keep moving," he growled. "We find cover." Lena nodded, though her hands shook. Pavel hesitated, then shouldered his pack. Artem had to be pulled up, legs stiff, eyes glassy. The snow swallowed sound. Their voices seemed to vanish before they left their mouths, devoured by the wind. Steps became a struggle, each footfall breaking through crust into hidden hollows. Supplies were dwindling, 2 days of rations, one working stove, batteries dying fast in the cold. Maxim rationed water, melted snow, but their fuel ran low, their hands red and raw. Tensions cracked beneath the surface. Artem mumbled that they should go back, turn west, retrace steps, but Maxim snapped at him, voice hard. Pavel tried to joke, tried to lift spirits, but no one laughed, not even him. Lena stayed silent, eyes always scanning, noting things. The trees thinning unnaturally, animal tracks appearing, disappearing, the snow too untouched, too perfect. That night, they dug into a snowbank, made a hollow for shelter, wrapped themselves in what they had. Outside, the storm roared like something alive, hurling itself against their fragile walls. Inside, 4 hearts beat too fast, breath clouding the dark. And just before they slept, they all heard it faint, almost swallowed by the storm. A sound, not wind, not ice cracking, not animal. A voice, somewhere out there, calling. When morning came, the storm had dulled, but the damage remained. The landscape had shifted, trees bent under ice, paths buried, landmarks erased. Maxim led them out, compass tight in his grip, jaw clenched. Lena followed close, Pavel behind, camera tucked away, lips cracked and pale. Artem dragged at the back, steps slow, head down, muttering under his breath. Hours passed. The sun stayed hidden, a pale smear behind thick clouds. The GPS was dead now, screen black, no blinking light to follow. The compass spun, jittery, refusing to hold true. Maxim kept moving, but Lena saw the flickers of doubt in his eyes, the way his hand trembled when he checked the map, the way he stared too long at trees that all looked the same. They found signs, but not the right ones. A half-buried boot print, too small to be theirs, broken branches snapped at odd heights. Once, they stumbled into a clearing where the snow had melted in a perfect ring, the ground beneath charred black, still faintly warm to the touch. Artem started to cry quietly, shoulders shaking. Pavel sat on a log, staring at nothing. Maxim paced the edge of the clearing, muttering, voice sharp, eyes darting to the tree line. Lena closed her notebook, hands clenched into fists. By dusk, they knew. They weren't where they thought they were. Nothing lined up, not the stars, not the ridges, not the river they should have crossed hours ago. Maxim refused to say it aloud, but Lena saw it in his face. Pavel whispered it to himself, "We're off the map." They set camp anyway, if only for the ritual of it. Firewood was scarce, heat fleeting. They huddled close, watching the dark press in. Artem kept glancing over his shoulder, flinching at every sound. Pavel held the camera again, but it stayed off. Maxim stared into the fire, lips moving in silent calculation. And Lena sat beside him, scribbling one last note. We are not alone out here. Somewhere beyond the flickering circle of light, the forest watched and waited. That night, the cold felt sharper. The fire hissed low, the wood too damp to catch properly, flames sputtering into smoke. They sat close, shoulders almost touching, but the silence stretched long between them. Maxim sharpened his knife slowly, methodically. Lena cradled a metal cup, its contents long cold. Pavel stared at the unlit camera in his lap, fingers drumming against its side. Artem sat slightly apart, hugging his knees, rocking just enough to make the others glance at him from the corners of their eyes. Then came the sounds. At first, they told themselves it was the forest settling, cracking branches under ice, the rustle of snow falling from bent limbs. But then footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling their camp just outside the reach of firelight. They froze, breath caught in their chests, straining to hear. A soft crunch, a faint shuffle, and then voices. Distant, faint, impossible. Words they couldn't quite make out, rising and falling like a conversation just beyond the trees. Maxim stood sharply, knife in hand, eyes fixed on the dark. Lena's hand gripped his arm. Pavel fumbled with the camera, but his fingers were too cold, too clumsy to switch it on. Artem whimpered softly, shaking his head, whispering, "No, no, no." They stayed like that for hours, or maybe minutes. Time felt strange, stretched thin by fear. The voices never came closer, but they never drifted away. And the footsteps circled, slow and measured, always just out of sight. When the fire finally collapsed into embers, they didn't rebuild it. They crawled into their tents, barely daring to breathe, Maxim with the knife still clutched tight in his hand, Lena's fingers white around the flare she hadn't lit, Pavel whispering shakily into his recorder. And Artem, his eyes wide open in the dark, watching the shadows dance against the thin canvas walls. Sometime past midnight, Lena woke first. Something was wrong. The air inside the tent felt too thin, too sharp, as if it had been emptied out. She reached over blindly, fingertips brushing Maxim's shoulder. He stirred, mumbling. Then came the scream. Artem. They tumbled out, boots half-laced, breath tearing from their throats in clouds of panic. The snow around the camp was disturbed prints, dragging marks, sharp-edged scrapes they didn't understand. Pavel yelled Artem's name, voice cracking. Maxim scanned the tree line, breath rasping, knife clenched so tight his knuckles went white. Lena saw it then, the line of footsteps leading away, shallow but unmistakable, weaving between trees into the dark. They followed, crashing through undergrowth, sliding over hidden roots and frozen hollows. Lena called out, voice hoarse. Pavel's camera swung uselessly at his side, bumping against his chest. Maxim moved fast, too fast, desperate. The footprints twisted, circled, doubled back, like someone running or being chased. And then they just stopped. No more tracks, no sign, no sound. The forest was silent again, watching, listening. Lena dropped to her knees, hands clawing at the snow, eyes wide, whispering Artem's name like a prayer. Maxim stood still, shoulders rising and falling, blade shaking faintly. Pavel stumbled back, falling hard into the snow, gasping. They searched until dawn, moving in widening circles, calling, pleading, cursing. But the forest gave nothing back. When the sun finally pushed through the trees, pale, cold, indifferent, they stood alone in the clearing, 3 where there had been 4. The fire pit sat cold and crumbled, the tents half buried in fresh snow. And somewhere just at the edge of hearing, the faintest sound, a laugh, or a cry, or something else entirely. The morning after Artem vanished, they sat in a ring of silence, each lost in their own unraveling thoughts. Maxim paced the edge of camp, eyes darting to the trees, muttering under his breath. Lena stared into the snow, fingers frozen stiff around her notebook, pages crumpled and smeared. Pavel tried to film, but his hands shook too much, the footage useless. His lips moved constantly, whispering to himself, old prayers, maybe, or curses. They argued by noon. Maxim wanted to move, said staying was death, said they had supplies, could cut west, find the river, find people. Lena disagreed, voice tight, reasoning that Artem might come back. That splitting would only make it worse. Pavel swayed between them, head jerking, nodding at whoever spoke last. His eyes were raw, bloodshot, like he hadn't slept at all. The map was useless, the compass wild. The trees closed in tighter every hour, the light a dull gray smudge overhead. They snapped at each other over everything: when to move, where to step, how much food to ration. Maxim's voice rose, Lena's fists clenched. At one point Pavel shouted Artem's name into the trees, over and over, until Maxim seized his shoulders and shook him hard, lips pulled back in a snarl. They made camp again that night, though the ground was hard as stone, the cold seeping through every layer. No one spoke. Maxim sat on guard, knife across his lap. Lena lay curled under a blanket, eyes open, tears freezing on her cheeks. Pavel filmed a short message, mouth trembling. Day 7, Artem's gone. We are. He stopped, started again. We are, and then he clicked it off. Outside, the woods watched. A soft wind moved through the branches, but no other sounds came. Not animal, not human, just the waiting dark. The next morning, Maxim pulled out the radio. His fingers were stiff, bloodless, fumbling as he set the frequency. The storm had eaten the batteries, the cold had devoured the circuits, but he tried anyway, holding the receiver close, voice low and rough. This is Expedition Volkov. 3 remaining. We've lost one. Coordinates unknown. Requesting assistance. Over. Crackling static. He tried again. Lena hovered close, one hand to her mouth, eyes wide. Pavel filmed from a few feet away, the lens shaking, catching the frost that clung to Maxim's eyelashes. Expedition Volkov, please respond. We are, Maxim's voice broke just a little. We are off course, requesting immediate extraction. More static. A faint hum. Then nothing. They sat in the snow, waiting. 10 minutes, 30, an hour. The sky overhead was a pale smear. No sun, no landmarks, just endless gray. Maxim ran a hand over his face, rough and shaking. Lena crouched beside the pack, whispering Artem's name like it might anchor her. Pavel sat cross-legged, camera in his lap, no longer filming, just staring at his own reflection in the lens. No one came. By evening, they tried one last time. A final message, Maxim's voice cracked and raw. Please, we need help. We have lost. He stopped, swallowed. We are alone, please. And the radio answered with silence. That night, they burned the last of the wood, the fire just a flicker against the cold. Somewhere deep in the trees, a sound moved slow, heavy, patient. But none of them rose. None of them spoke. They had called, they had waited, and the forest had already decided. When they missed their second check-in, it triggered the first alert. By the third, a formal search was underway. Yakutsk authorities coordinated with local guides, weather specialists, and the military. Helicopters lifted off at dawn, slicing through pale skies, their rotors beating across endless waves of pine. On the ground, dog teams and trackers fanned out, boots crunching over crusted snow, voices low over radios. They called names into the trees: Maxim, Lena, Pavel, Artem. But the forest gave no reply. The initial search followed standard patterns: retrace known routes, cover the most traveled paths, sweep from the last GPS ping. But here, the rules didn't hold. The snow was wrong. Too smooth, too uniform. No tracks, no breaks, as if the forest had stitched itself shut behind them. The helicopters made slow passes over the region, their thermal cameras sweeping white landscapes for the heat of a fire, the flicker of movement, any disruption in the cold. Nothing. Villagers in the nearest settlement spoke of the group with shaking heads, small gestures. They went where we don't go, one old man said, tapping his temple. The land remembers. It doesn't give back. But still the teams pressed on, day after day, their grids widening, their supplies thinning. After a week, the first pieces surfaced: a glove snagged on a low branch, faded pink; a notebook page, half frozen into a stream; a length of paracord knotted at both ends, hanging limp from a tree. No bodies, no camp, just remnants, scattered like breadcrumbs in a maze with no center. At the end of each day, the search teams sat around small, hissing stoves, their maps spread out, their voices quiet. They marked what they found, where they searched, where they'd go next. But each night, as the dark folded in, something gnawed at their edges, a feeling they didn't voice, a suspicion they didn't write down. They weren't just looking in the wrong places, they were looking in the wrong way. On day 9, a tracker named Yuri spotted at a break in the trees, unnatural, like the forest had been peeled back and then forgotten. The team pushed through, boots sinking, lungs burning, until they stood at the edge of the clearing. There, half buried in snow and shadow, was the camp. Tents still standing, their fabric sagging under weeks of weather. Gear stowed neatly, cooking equipment packed, notebooks sealed in plastic. Maxim's knife lay sheathed near the fire pit, untouched. Lena's field notes sat under a rock, weighted against the wind. Pavel's camera, its battery long dead, hung from a low branch, lens cap off, pointed at nothing. But no footprints. No drag marks. No sign of struggle or flight. The snow around the camp was smooth, unbroken, as if they had simply ceased. The dogs refused to go further, tails low, ears flat, whining at the edges of the clearing. The men stayed anyway, moving carefully, almost reverently, cataloging, photographing, bagging. They radioed updates back to base, their voices clipped, professional, trying to hold on to procedure. Inside one of the tents, Yuri found a voice recorder, its battery nearly drained. He clicked it on, heart pounding, static, a faint breath. Then, a whisper, Pavel's voice, close to the mic, trembling. "It's not just us out here." The tape hissed, then clicked off. By nightfall, the team withdrew, leaving the camp marked, flagged, but untouched. They sat around their own fire miles away, staring into the flames. One man muttered, "They should have been here, they should have been here," but they weren't. They never were. News of the vanished expedition spread quickly, first across Yakutsk, then Moscow, then far beyond. 4 explorers, experienced, well-equipped, gone without a trace. The press pounced, headlines cycling through every grim possibility. Animal attack? A bear, maybe? Or a pack of wolves? But trackers found no blood, no fur, no signs of struggle. Maxim was too seasoned for that, they said. He would have fought. Others suggested they got lost, wandered deeper, succumbed to the cold. But the camp was intact. Supplies were untouched. If they had left, why leave their lifelines behind? Soon, the darker theories emerged. Locals whispered of the old stories, the shaman's scar, the burned clearing, the cursed ground. Hunters spoke of lights in the trees, figures glimpsed between branches, voices that called people off the path. An ex-military officer went on record suggesting they had stumbled into a restricted zone, something buried, something not meant to be found. He hinted at experimental weapons, hidden facilities, disappearances swept under the snow. Online, it grew wilder. Conspiracy forums dissected Pavel's last recordings, amplifying the faint background sounds into patterns, into whispers. One frame from his camera footage, a blurred shape between trees, was circulated endlessly, debated, enhanced, overanalyzed. People spoke of creatures, of things not yet classified by science, of something watching from the woods. Authorities tried to hold the line. A senior investigator dismissed the stranger theories at a press conference, calling the case a tragic accident compounded by extreme weather. But even he hesitated just for a second when a reporter asked why the camp had been left so perfectly undisturbed. Months passed, and the search scaled down. Helicopters left. The dogs were sent home. Volunteers stopped coming. But the stories remained, circling like crows over an empty clearing. What happened out there? And why did the forest keep its silence? In St. Petersburg, Lena's parents kept her room exactly as it was, the books on her shelf, the winter jacket on its hook, the half-finished knitting project by her bed. They spoke of her in the present tense. She'll come back. She's out there. In Moscow, Maxim's brother answered every call, every letter, every reporter. He pored over maps, argued with officials, begged for more search efforts. "He's stronger than anyone knows," he told the press. "If anyone can survive, it's Maxim." But at night, when the cameras were gone, he sat alone, staring at the untouched bottle of vodka they were supposed to share when Maxim came home. Pavel's sister took to social media, posting his old videos, pleading for clues, for leads, for anything. Strangers flooded her inbox, some with sympathy, some with wild claims. She answered every message. "Please," she wrote again and again. "Please, if you know anything." Artem's mother stopped answering the door. She turned off her phone. Neighbors saw her at the window sometimes, standing still for hours, as if waiting to hear her son's footsteps in the hall. The families gathered together once, months after the last search ended. They sat in a quiet room, surrounded by coffee cups gone cold, photographs laid out in neat rows. They spoke in circles, the facts, the theories, the hopes. Someone would suggest hiring a private team, someone else would bring up costs, the dangers, the risks. In the end, no decisions were made. Just a long, aching silence. Time moved forward without them. Seasons turned. The snow melted, then came back. Reporters moved on. The public forgot. But for the families, every day remained the same. A waiting. A wondering. A question with no answer. Out there, somewhere in the endless forest, 4 paths had ended, and none of them knew how or why. By the end of the first year, the story had slipped from headlines into whispers, and the whispers only grew darker. Online forums buzzed with claims of cover-ups. "The military knows," some wrote. They were in a restricted zone. A grainy satellite image surfaced, showing the stretch of taiga where the group vanished, with what some insisted were blurred outlines, structures, vehicles, something camouflaged. Officials dismissed it as misinterpretation, tricks of shadow, ice patterns. But the seed was planted. In the villages near the Lena Basin, older rumors resurfaced. Hunters gathered at bars, voices low, and spoke of lights seen above the treetops, pulsing softly in the sky the night the storm came. Others told of a place locals avoided, a scar on the land where compasses spun and animals went silent. They called it cursed, older than memory. They said those who stepped there didn't come back, or if they did, they weren't the same. A television special aired late one night, leaning into the supernatural. A former geologist claimed the area was a thin place, a tear between worlds. "You can feel it," he told the host, eyes wide, "like the ground is watching you." The show spliced in old footage from the Dyatlov Pass, the infamous Russian disappearance decades earlier, drawing parallels. Too easily, too eagerly. Pavel's camera footage was picked apart frame by frame. One blurry shot near the end became infamous online. A figure, or something shaped like a figure, standing between the trees. It could have been a trick of the light, a smear on the lens, or it could have been something else. Theories spread like wildfire. Shadow people. Military experiments. Creatures native to a part of the world barely touched by man. But under the noise, under the spectacle, one fact remained. 4 people had walked into the Siberian wilderness and vanished. And no one, not police, not scientists, not search teams, could explain why. 2 years after the last radio signal, the authorities made it official. The expedition members were declared dead, their records closed, their names entered into the state registry. Death certificates were signed, mailed, and filed away. For the families, it felt like erasure. Lena's parents refused to hold a funeral. Without her, her father said quietly, "There's nothing to bury." Her mother still set a place for her at the table, still folded away news clippings in a drawer no one was allowed to touch. Maxim's brother signed the paperwork with a shaking hand, then tore the official notice into pieces as soon as the officials left. To him, the search wasn't over, it had only gone underground. He started saving, reaching out to private search groups, mapping satellite grids at night by hand. Pavel's sister marked the date with a post online. 2 years, no proof, no goodbye. I don't believe it. She kept his videos live, his voice still reaching through screens, a record against forgetting. Artem's mother, frail now, let the government's letter sit unopened on her kitchen table for weeks. Neighbors stopped visiting. They said she barely spoke, barely moved, just sat in the old armchair facing the window, as if watching for her son on the path outside. For officials, it was procedure, the closing of a case. For the families, it was a wound deepened, not healed. The forest stayed silent. Expeditions came and went, none official, none fruitful. A few years later, a hiker swore he saw footprints deep in the taiga, bootprints too large for his own, too fresh for old camps. Hunters told of hearing voices at night, calling faintly through the trees. Nothing was ever confirmed. Nothing was ever disproven. Time marched on. Birthdays passed. Anniversaries slipped by, but in every family, in every quiet room, one truth lingered like frost on glass. No bodies, no graves, no end. And in the heart of the forest, something waited, undisturbed, watching the seasons turn. It was late autumn when a hunter named Vadim stumbled onto it, a find that would ignite the mystery all over again. He wasn't looking for answers. He was tracking elk, moving carefully through the thinning snow near the edge of the Lena Basin, a place locals still avoided when they could. The cold was biting, the light fading fast when he saw it. A strip of red fabric snagged on a branch, fluttering weakly in the wind. Curious, Vadim pushed through the undergrowth and found more. Bits of torn canvas, a cracked thermos half buried in moss and tucked under a fallen log, protected from the worst of the elements, a small weather-stained notebook. Its cover was soft and discolored, pages swollen and warped, but inside, among smeared notes and half-legible sketches, was one sentence, written clear and sharp, the ink darker, fresher. "It's following us." Vadim brought the notebook to the authorities, hands shaking as he passed it over. They verified it against old samples. The handwriting was Lena's. Notes matched her style observations, species counts, plant samples. But the final line was something else. A break, a warning, a record not meant for study but survival. The media exploded. Headlines roared back to life. Was one of them alive? Was it a hoax? Had someone been out there, all this time, trapped or hiding or hunted? For the families, it was another wound, another cut reopened. Lena's parents clung to it, whispering that it proved she was out there. Maxim's brother demanded the government relaunch the search. Pavel's sister wept on camera, holding the page to her chest. Artem's mother sat in her window, watching, waiting, unchanged. Officials hesitated, but volunteers did not. Within weeks, a team was on the ground. They came without fanfare, a mix of volunteers, trackers, amateur adventurers. Led by Dmitri, a seasoned outdoorsman who had once known Maxim, they set off in early winter, carrying new gear, maps, thermal drones, and the weight of desperate hope. For days they pushed into the forest, retracing routes marked in Lena's notebook, scouring the clearing where the camp had been found, where Vadim had stumbled upon the last clue. The forest met them with indifferent snow, so deep it swallowed boots, wines that tore at tents, trees that creaked in the night like bones shifting underground. They found signs, or thought they did, a boot print but old, misshapen, a flicker of heat on the drone gone when they approached. Scraps of fabric, a rusted carabiner, shadows in the tree line that left no tracks. Each night they gathered by the fire, talking less, glancing often over their shoulders. Dmitri kept a journal. On the 5th day he wrote, "There's something wrong here. The quiet is too heavy." By the 7th day they turned back. Supplies dwindling, one man injured, another refusing to leave his tent, pale and shaking. They left markers, coordinates, samples. They promised to return. But when they emerged from the forest, frostbitten and empty-handed, the headlines were already fading. Another dead end, another failed search, another chapter closing without an answer. In the families' homes, the days stretched on. The notebook sat sealed in evidence, its message echoing in every quiet room. And out in the heart of the forest, winter came down like a shroud. Whatever waited there, if anything waited at all, remained untouched, watching, silent, patient. By the third winter, the locals began to talk again, not on television, not to reporters, but in low voices across bar tables, over cracked mugs of tea, in the hush of late-night kitchens. They spoke of sightings a figure moving through the trees, too thin, too fast, barefoot even in the snow. Vadim, the hunter who'd found Lena's notebook, said he'd seen it first. A flash of pale skin in the undergrowth, hunched and fast, gone before his eyes could focus. He'd raised his rifle by instinct, then lowered it, heart pounding. It wasn't an animal, he told a friend. It was a man, or it was once. Others followed. A fisherman said something watched him from the opposite bank of a frozen creek, crouched low behind the reeds. A trapper found tracks long, narrow footprints, bare, weaving erratically between his snares. Even a group of teenagers, drunk and wandering near the old search zone, came running home pale-faced, swearing they saw someone lurching through the trees, arms thin as sticks, face covered in tangled hair. Most outsiders dismissed it as local folklore, cabin fever, drunken tales. But the stories persisted, and they all circled the same area, the place where the expedition had last camped, where the ground still carried that strange, lingering warmth, where the trees grew warped and wrong. For the families, it was another knife. Maxim's brother clung to the reports, desperate. "It's him," he insisted. "He's survived out there." Pavel's sister scoured every forum, every sighting. Lena's parents prayed quietly at home. Only Artem's mother remained silent, sitting by her window watching the road. In the empty forest, under moonlight, the figure kept moving, seen but never found, alive, maybe, or something that only looked like life. Spring brought something no one expected. A university lab in Novosibirsk, running a routine satellite sweep of the Lena Basin, flagged an anomaly, a human-sized heat signature deep in the forest, miles from any settlement or known hunting trail. It appeared once, flickered, vanished, then reappeared a few days later, closer to the burned clearing, then again, further north. The grad student who spotted it, Dasha, thought it was a glitch. She ran diagnostics, checked calibration. But the signature kept coming back, faint but distinct, warmer than a deer, smaller than a bear, moving with patterns too irregular for an animal. When the news leaked, it hit fast. Local papers ran the headline, "Survivor?" The families flooded officials with calls, emails, demands. Maxim's brother was at the office door the next morning, slamming his fist on the desk. "Send someone!" The government hesitated. Too many false alarms, too many dead ends. But behind closed doors, quiet plans stirred. A private expedition began to form. Dmitri, the old search leader, was called. Drones were prepped, supplies loaded. That summer, they would return. But the forest had seen this before. The pattern always repeated. Searchers came, searchers left, and deep beneath the trees, something moved, just beyond reach, waiting for them to come closer. It was August when they found him. The private expedition had been combing the region for weeks, drones above, teams below, no sign, no sound, just the endless, choking expanse of green. Dmitri was ready to call it. Supplies were thinning, spirits were thinner, and then, on the 23rd day, a drone picked up movement. At first, they thought it was an animal, a pale flicker darting through the trees. But when they zoomed in, when they saw the way it stumbled, the way it reached out blindly, they froze. Arms. Legs. Human. The call went up fast. A helicopter was scrambled from Yakutsk. Dmitri and his team pushed on foot, cutting through underbrush, hearts hammering, and then they saw him. He was crouched at the edge of a stream, naked but for a shredded coat, hair matted, skin gray and raw. He was little more than bone, hands clawed from cold, lips cracked to the gums. When the light from the helicopter cut through the trees, he flinched, throwing up his arms, a broken sound tearing from his throat, part sob, part growl, part something they couldn't name. Dmitri knelt first, hands up, voice soft. "Maxim?" he tried. "Maxim Volkov?" The man looked up. His eyes were sunken, wild, yellowed with malnutrition. But for a moment, just a moment, something flickered there. Recognition, a name remembered, a world outside the trees. They airlifted him out under a setting sun, the chopper blades stirring the treetops, bending them low. Dmitri watched from the ground, mouth dry, heart thudding against his ribs. They had found one. But they all knew the same thing. 3 were still missing. And the man they had pulled from the forest, if he was Maxim at all, looked like someone who hadn't just been lost. He looked like someone who had been running. The doctors barely believed it. A man lost for 6 years in the Siberian wilderness, alive. Barely. They stabilized him first, fluids, warmth, glucose. His body was a ruin, frostbite blackening 2 fingers, old fractures healed wrong, muscles wasted almost to the bone. His pulse was thin, his breath rattling, but it was his mind that alarmed them most. He flinched from touch, from light, from sound. When nurses came near, he snarled, baring broken teeth, huddling against the wall. His eyes flicked constantly to the corners of the room, as if waiting for something to step through. He spoke little fragments, murmurs, mostly in Russian, sometimes in a mix of other languages, sometimes in a tongue no one could place. The hospital staff cleared a whole wing for him, cutting him off from visitors, press, even family. Maxim's brother was allowed in once and came out pale, shaking, refusing to speak of what had passed between them. Doctors called in specialists, trauma experts, neurologists, psychologists. They ran scans, drew blood, waited. But recovery was slow. Sometimes, at night, the nurses reported strange things. Maxim, standing at the window, forehead pressed to the glass, eyes fixed on the tree line beyond the hospital, humming tunelessly, whispering under his breath, scratching something into the bedsheets with his ruined nails, circles, spirals, marks they couldn't decipher. And sometimes, when they checked the monitors, his heart would spike sharply just for a second, as if he had remembered something, as if something, somewhere, had remembered him. For weeks, Maxim was silent. He ate in small bites, shaking hands, raising spoon to mouth. He slept in short, restless bursts, flinching at every noise, waking with a gasp, sheets twisted tight around his thin frame. Nurses tiptoed around him, doctors murmured at his door. His brother visited once, twice, sitting beside the bed, whispering old stories, pleading. But Maxim just stared through him, through the walls, through the world. Then one night, he spoke. It was a nurse who heard it first, Marina, working the late shift, checking vitals under dim light. She adjusted his IV, humming softly under her breath, when his fingers shot out, cold and sharp, closing around her wrist. She froze, heart pounding, eyes wide. And Maxim, voice like sandpaper, raw from disuse, leaned forward and rasped, "They're still out there." Marina whispered his name, her voice shaking. "Who's out there?" His eyes flicked to hers, yellowed, sunken, shining with something between terror and certainty. His grip tightened, bone against bone. "Them," he breathed. We thought it was just the forest." Alarms went off, nurses rushing in, doctors flooding the room. But Maxim didn't fight, didn't pull away. He just kept murmuring the same words, over and over, like a mantra, like a warning. "They're still out there." When they sat him down, when the sedative softened his edges, when the doctors, the investigators, his brother, all gathered close, Maxim spoke in fits and starts, a puzzle of broken sentences. But the pieces came together. He told of the snowstorm, the lost path, the days without direction, how Artem disappeared first, pulled from the tent in the dark, leaving behind only footprints that led nowhere. How Pavel had cracked next, mumbling to himself, hearing voices no one else heard, until one morning he was gone too, his boots left at the edge of camp. How Lena stayed longest, sharp-eyed, quiet, holding the group together until they reached the clearing, the burned earth, the scorched ring, the place Maxim called the heart. He whispered of the lights they saw there, flickering just out of reach, not fire, not stars, something in between. How the trees bent toward them, how the air changed, how the silence grew heavy, pressing against their skulls, making their thoughts slip sideways. And how one night Lena stepped into the clearing and did not come back. "They're not dead," Maxim whispered, voice shaking, tears carving lines through the dirt on his face. "Not gone. Not like you think." He raised his eyes, hollow and terrified, to the circle around his bed. "They're still there, waiting." Maxim's voice wavered, words scraping from his throat like they were being pulled out against his will. The doctors leaned closer, his brother gripping the bed frame so tightly his knuckles went white. "It wasn't just us," Maxim whispered. "We weren't alone out there." He spoke of the first days, when they thought it was panic, the feeling of eyes on their backs, the sense of footsteps just behind, quick to stop when they turned. Artem had laughed it off, called it nerves. Pavel tried to film it, spinning the camera at every sound. Lena frowned but said nothing, only scribbled faster in her notebook. But then came the shapes, tall, thin, pale against the trees, visible only in the corner of the eye. When they looked directly, nothing. But when they stopped watching, when they let their guard drop, the shapes would shift closer. The laughter at night, soft and childlike, not theirs. The sounds of weeping, drifting between trees. Maxim's hands trembled as he spoke. They wanted us to stay, they didn't want us to leave. He described dreams that weren't dreams, waking to find himself standing at the edge of the clearing, unable to remember how he got there. Seeing Lena in the dark, her mouth moving, eyes wide with something that wasn't sleep. The forest tightening around them, the trees closing in, as if guiding them deeper, step by step, breath by breath. "We were being hunted," he murmured, voice cracking. "But not for food, not for death." He closed his eyes, drawing in a sharp, shaking breath. "For something else." As Maxim's mind drifted between lucidity and fever, the doctors recorded everything. But it was one phrase, one detail that set the room cold. "We crossed the line," Maxim murmured. "I saw it on the map later, the line. We weren't supposed to be there." He spoke of an old boundary, marked decades ago, maybe longer. A zone not listed on official maps but whispered of by hunters, avoided by guides, skirted by even the military. An area where compasses failed, where equipment flickered, where even the animals stopped, turned, and fled. "We saw markers," Maxim said, voice thin. "Half buried. Symbols I couldn't read. The air changed when we passed them. It felt like stepping through a wall we couldn't see." Lena had noticed it first, the way the trees bent, all curving inward, the way the snow lay in perfect circles, the static that hissed in their radios, even when turned off. Maxim's brother leaned in, desperate. "What was it? What did you find?" But Maxim only shook his head, eyes filling with something raw, unnameable. "It wasn't a place," he whispered. "It was waiting, and we went in anyway." His hands gripped the blanket, knuckles white, breath quickening, as if the memory itself was enough to pull him back under. And outside the hospital, beyond the window, the forest stretched quietly under the pale light, waiting, as it always had, just beyond the edge of knowing. Maxim's breathing was shallow, voice faint, but when he spoke now, it came in a rush, as if the words had been waiting, pressing against his ribs for years. "We made a pact," he said, staring past the doctors, past his brother, past the hospital walls. "The night before Lena disappeared." His fingers twisted in the blanket, nails cracked, skin pale and papery. We knew we weren't getting out together." He described that last night in the clearing, the cold biting through their clothes, the fire no longer warming them. Artem was already gone, Pavel barely spoke, Lena sat with her head in her hands. Maxim had been pacing, counting supplies they both knew wouldn't last. "We were being broken down," he whispered. "Something wanted us weak, confused. We could feel it circling." So they decided. One of them would try to leave, to break free, to reach the edge. The others would stay, to buy time, to distract whatever was out there, Maxim had argued. Pavel had sobbed. Lena had been the one to speak it aloud. "One of us makes it. One." And in the end, it was Maxim. He said goodbye without saying the word, pressing his forehead to Lena's, squeezing Pavel's shoulder. He left in the gray dawn, boots soaked, pack light, not daring to look back. The guilt in his voice was raw, trembling, when he said it. They stayed so I could run. The doctors leaned in closer now, the room hushed, breath held on every word. Maxim's eyes flicked from face to face, but he wasn't seeing them, he was somewhere else. It wasn't the cold, he murmured. It wasn't hunger or wolves or the dark. It was something behind it. He spoke of lights faint at first, like fireflies in the trees, then pulsing, shimmering, moving with purpose. He spoke of time that slipped, nights where hours vanished, mornings that came too soon or not at all. They heard voices, not quite words, weaving through the pines, brushing against their skin. Whispers that told them things they didn't understand, that filled their heads with images they couldn't shake. Pavel began speaking in his sleep, answering to names that weren't his. Lena wept without knowing why. Maxim lost track of days, woke miles from camp without memory of walking. They were inside, he whispered, pressing a shaking hand to his temple. Not just outside the tents, but here, in us. His brother reached out, touched his arm gently. Maxim's breath hitched. It wasn't seen, he said, eyes wide, hollow, but it saw us. And somewhere in the night-lit forest, far beyond the reach of rescue, something waited still, where no map dared mark and no compass dared turn. Maxim's strength was fading. The doctors had warned his brother, the weight loss, the exposure, the trauma his body was holding on by threads. But even as his pulse weakened, his mind surged, restless, caught between memory and nightmare. He whispered through cracked lips, clutching at the edge of the bed, eyes darting to corners no one else could see. "They're still there," he murmured, "still waiting." His brother leaned in, voice tight, trying to pull him back. "Maxim, please, tell me what to do. Tell them where." But Maxim only shook his head, barely a breath left to carry the words. His fingers curled into fists, then loosened, trembling. His eyes locked on his brother's wide, dark, brimming with a terror too deep to name. "Don't," he rasped, "don't go back." His brother froze, the room falling to a hush. Machines beeped softly, monitors traced the thin line of life still flickering. Maxim's head sagged to the side, breath rattling, the last of his strength slipping away like water through cupped hands. And just before the sedatives claimed him, before exhaustion closed his eyes, his lips shaped one last thing, a whisper, a plea, maybe a warning meant for whoever would listen. "Don't go back." The news spread like wildfire. A survivor, after 6 years, a final message, trembling on the edge of life and death. Reporters circled the hospital, officials drafted statements, scientists dissected his words. Military contacts reviewed the satellite images, the recovered notebook, the blurred drone footage that showed movement where no one should be. Meetings stretched late into the night. Should they send a team? A new expedition, better equipped, more prepared not to search for survivors, but to understand. To investigate what had truly happened in that deep scar of forest no one had dared enter since. But Maxim's words lingered, heavy in every room. "Don't go back." Some argued it was trauma, nothing more. Others weren't so sure. The locals stayed silent, watching from the edges, shaking their heads slowly when asked. In the end, no decision was made. Not yet. The files remained open, the plans suspended, the maps spread across tables under tired hands. And somewhere far beyond the cities, past the last outposts, past the old hunter trails, and the burned clearing where the snow never settled quite right, the forest waited. Under the moonlight, a shadow shifted between the trees, thin, fast, watching, not gone, not finished. Still there. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.